Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services here this afternoon, we would kindly ask if everyone would please turn off or silence all electronic devices. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Shalom, everyone. I'm Rabbi Gary Gans. I'm the Rabbi Emeritus of Congregation Beth Tikva. Occasionally, Lorraine would come to our services for High Holy Days. So I'm sad but honored to be with you today as well, as we acknowledge her life and her death. Ma'ayan HaChayim, wellspring of life. We've come together sharing our memories, sharing our sorrow of the life of Lorraine Burday. We recall the blessing of her life. We thank God for all that was good and true in her life, and for the precious memories which shall endure. Eternal God, her family, her friends, are bowed in grief and seek light to dispel the dark gloom that threatens to overwhelm them. Be gracious to those who mourn, O Lord, for they are in distress. Bless them with your compassion. Ease their burden of sorrow. Send them light and peace. For it is written, "Fear not, as I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will sustain you with my power." And let us say, Amen. Just before the formal ceremony began, you saw me cut the ribbons worn by Matt and by Lisa. By tradition, it is on the left-hand side at the death of a parent. Bad biology, good emotion. The heart was on the left-hand side at one point, we thought. And therefore, for this difficult death and acknowledging the ceremony for a parent, this button of support was on the left-hand side. For every other relationship is on the right-hand side. And when you see them closer up, when we conclude, you'll see that the ribbons are cut, but not entirely, because the cut represents the emotional separation that exists for them. But at the top, each of the ribbons are intact, because those are the memories, those are the hopes, those are all of the reminiscences that they hold on to, that despite her death, retain and are retained and will continue to be held dearly by them. I'm going to recite Psalm 23, an excerpt in Hebrew and an English interpretation on Lorraine's behalf. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, benodesha yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yanachaleni. Nafshi yeshovev, yancheni magle tzedek, lema'an shemo. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God leads me lie down in green pastures and beside the still waters. God guides me on paths of righteousness. God revives my soul for the sake of God's glory. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for God is with me. God's rod and staff do comfort me and set the table in sight of my enemies. God anoints my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. In the undefined future, Lorraine will be interred at the Arlington National Cemetery alongside her deceased husband, Harry. We acknowledge Matt and Lisa here today, and we become a community of consolation as we reach out collectively, offering our feelings of support for the two of them. Over the past day or two, Matt and I have had an interesting text exchange where he has discovered the ketubah of his parents and his grandparents, the marriage certificates. My hobby is genealogy. I spend a lot of time with these documents, and I love looking at them. These were written with fairly good handwriting in Hebrew, and I was able to decipher the Hebrew names from the ceremony taking place in Atlantic City for his parents and signed by the officiant rabbi, and his great-grandparents in New York City, it said in Hebrew, and extended the knowledge of the Hebrew names back several generations. In a bit, I'll be reading a prayer that indeed will be using Lorraine's Hebrew name, but just so you have it in mind, Yiddish name actually in this case, is Liba, which means my love. The daughter of Moshe is her father. So this is a valuable discovery, acknowledging who they are and were, and remembering their very identity, not just their English names, but the assigned Hebrew names as well. So the high point of Lorraine's life, in fact, was living in Atlantic City, and expressed the strength of independence by living there. And I enjoyed seeing those pictures out in the lobby, especially of her running certificate that she wore as she ran. Maybe that's what helped get her to an age of 98. But even more than that, you brought years to her life and life to her years with your attentive care, with the sense of securing who she was and her safety. So that too is an important mitzvah, an important imperative indeed, all the way from the Torah of how we respond to the elderly, our parents, and how we secure their lives. We acknowledge, I've already given you the Hebrew, but the English, her father was Morris, that was the Moshe, and her mother was Esther. And this is part of your family heritage, even on sad days like today. It's appropriate to identify with who they were. I'm going to share a text with you, a prayer that I've shared with so many thousands, it feels like, members of my congregation over the years. If one can have a favorite funereal prayer, this is it. I shared it at my own parents' funerals from this very pulpit, because the text, as I will translate for you, is imbued with meaning and is valuable. Written by Ben Sirach several thousand years ago. And he wrote, as I translate, "We are all destined to die. We share with all who ever lived, with all who ever will be. Cry for the dead. Hide not your grief. Do not restrain your mourning, but remember that continuing sorrow is worse than death. When the dead are at rest, let their memory be a source of peace, and be consoled when the soul departs. Death is better than a life of pain. Eternal rest is better than lingering illness. As a drop of water in the sea, as a grain of sand on the shore, are our few days in eternity. The good things in life last for a short time, but a good name, a good reputation endures forever. From the book of Proverbs, I read the text in Hebrew known as Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor, woman of value. A woman of value, woman of valor, who can find? She is more precious than fine pearls. Her family trusts in her, and so they lack nothing. She does them good, never harm, all the days of her life. She perceives that her labor is rewarding. Her candle burns on into the night. She reaches out to those in need and extends her hands to the poor. She is clothed in strength and dignity, and she faces the future cheerfully. She speaks with wisdom. The law of kindness is on her lips. Her family rise up and they bless her, and they sing her praises. Many daughters have done valiantly, but you excel them all. This is a day to remember. Remember in joy, joyfulness, and sadness. From the book of Ecclesiastes, for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Indeed, it is a time to speak and to share nostalgia and reminiscences and strength. And I'm honored to call on Matt to come up to the beam of the share now, please.
I want to thank you all for being here today. This is certainly a special time for me and Lisa. We want to thank you all for being here because your presence is extraordinarily meaningful to all of us, and we really appreciate you being here. I also want to thank Rabbi Gans very much. He has been working with me, as he was saying, over the last several days, helping me tremendously understand some of my mom's past from some documents that I had actually only found just recently. And his efforts to help me understand more about her has been extraordinarily meaningful in ways that I can't really fully express. So his being here today is extraordinarily valuable for us, and we really appreciate that. And as he was saying, some of the sermons that he had given, especially during the high holidays, were extraordinarily potent and had extensive meaning for both myself and my mom, and were always very inspiring. So thank you, Rabbi, again, for everything. As many of you know, my mom can be very stubborn. She was stubborn at times. And specifically as regards the last few months, year, when she was really kind of failing and not really herself, I would often ask her to consider reaching out and having me call you, pretty much everyone here. And the response that I received often was, why don't we just do that later? Let's do it tomorrow. how about Saturday? When it might be Monday, when I would ask. And, she just wasn't really up to the task. And as I've reflected on this, because that's not the way that my mom ever was, as you all, I think, know. She always liked to reach out. She was extraordinarily friendly and had a number of friends, especially in high school, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment here. So it was definitely different, the way that she, I think, started to just kind of withdraw. And that's, I think, how I see it, that she was starting to withdraw and just not wanting to interact with you all. And I have felt very, very badly about that, but I at the same time understand, I think, her reasoning for that. She just wasn't herself, and I think that she just was slowly wanting to go. And as hard as that was, I think it was something that she chose to do. But I at the same time, I do want to thank you all for the cards that you sent, the cards that you made, the food that you brought, the food that you've made, your texts, your emails, your phone calls. I mean, it's just hard to know how much to tell you that has meant to us. So I just want to express our thanks for that. So thank you so much. That has held a significant place in my heart, and I know in her heart too. So thank you for always being there. So where do I go now in terms of telling you a little bit about my mom? And I thought about what, frankly, I would say here. I think some of you have known my mom for a while and have been extraordinarily supportive of her. Where do you start when your heart is aching and you don't have that warm blanket that's your mom anymore? Where do you go? It's clearly a challenge. It's been a challenge for me, but at the same time, I know that Mom would not want me to spend the day mourning. In fact, I'm sure that she would want me to just be out on the road running somewhere and say, hey, did you go running yet today? Which she often would ask. So I know that she's in a better place, and I know that she would not want us to sit here and think that she's in some suffering place, which she's not. And as much as we all miss her, I know that she's in a better place at this point. So I thought, well, okay, how can I sort of summarize things, for all of you, many of you, if not all of you, who have known her, maybe not personally, but certainly I think emotionally from things I might have said or done. And I thought to myself, all right, well, I can make this really simple. So Mom was great. She loved Atlantic City, as Rabbi Gantz was saying, and she did. She went back there often as her mom lived there. Her mother, Esther, lived in the Mayfair, which is right across the street from the high school where she went. She loved to run. She was kind and thoughtful. I could sort of finish it there. But then I thought, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, there's so many things after I thought that came rushing into my head and my mind, and I thought that's clearly inadequate. So I can't do that. So I wanted to, I think, go back. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about who she was from the beginning. So Mom was born in New York City. She and her parents soon moved to Atlantic City. Her father, who I unfortunately never got to know, my grandfather, Morris, was a furrier. And my mom told me multiple times over that he was extraordinarily good at his craft. He apparently was so well known on the Northeast Corridor, New York, this region, and even, I think, she mentioned a couple times the East Coast, that he was often called upon for his services. So, for example, she told me one time it was a hurricane. It was really a very severe hurricane, and for some reason, in New York City, somebody needed to have a fur, I think, the next day or the next couple of days taken care of, and he got on the train and was driving rainstorm, hurricane, and took care of what needed to be done, and then came back. She was extraordinarily proud of him and often spoke about him to me at length, and her mom, too. And her mom lived in Atlantic City for years. She worked at Burke's, which is a gift store on the boardwalk, and Mom was able to go from the apartment where they lived after my grandfather passed away right to the high school, which was right next door. She couldn't get any closer. And she noted that some of her best years were spent there. And I know that was the case. She had a lot of friends there, and in looking at her yearbook, she graduated in 1942, which was right in the middle of the war, and it was tough, you know? But you'd never know it from the things that I came across in the yearbooks. And she had one from 41 when she was a junior, and then in 42 when she graduated. And she had some interesting achievements, and I thought I would just kind of go through that a little bit with you. And this is from her yearbook, that she had perfect attendance her first year. After that, I don't know. I'm not sure. But definitely in her first year. She was in the dance club, in the French club. She loved French very much. She was a member of the reception committee. She was a study hall monitor, and she was on the library committee. And regarding French, she had a teacher that she often would say called her Lorraine. So her name is Lorraine, but she was often called by this teacher as Lorraine, and she loved that. And I also found it very interesting that my mother was on the basketball team. Now, my mom was not very tall, but somehow she ended up on the basketball team. She played paddle tennis and volleyball. And you know, when I asked her about those things later, many years later, she didn't seem to say too much. So I believe that she did those things. I just found it so extraordinarily interesting. And I really enjoyed reading a number of comments that were written by her friends in the yearbook. And the most common words that I came across, the number one word that seems to, I think, have been very common at that time was swell. You are so swell. And that really struck me, the meaning of being swell, you know. She was also nifty and sweet. And that commentary was used often as well. But some people wrote more than just that. Some people really got to know my mom and actually wrote at length. Things like something B wrote. To begin to say what I want to would be to do an injustice to what I feel in my heart. I know that a greater friendship I could never find. You are faithful and understanding, and that means a lot to me. And to read that, I was really very touched by that. And some other things people said, you've really been one of the best friends I ever had. I can't remember when you ever scowled. Is that a perpetual smile? Best of luck to a swell little ticklish girl. That was from Adeline. Somebody named Marion wrote this when I'm still trying to figure it out. You're really sweet, but a little screwy at times. So maybe that was her fun side that she had. Your personality will take you far in life. And then there were interesting comments about the tan. So my mom loved the beach. And Atlantic City, apart in the Mayfair, where she lived, was literally 1 block from the beach. And so there were comments about her tan. She seemed to be tan, I think, quite a lot. Your tan is nifty. The best to the girl with the best suntan. And I started wondering, after I kept reading these commentaries about her tan, if, you know, did she play hooky a lot? You know, I know after year 1, she didn't seem to have perfect attendance, so I really am not sure. But it was something that she loved. I mean, she loved sitting out there. She would have oil on. She would have, this is what she told me, I never remember seeing it, oil, these aluminum, you know, folders, these reflectors that, you know, intensify the sun, that you can get the worst burn in your life or tan if you know what to do. She loved doing that. And I think this was in the days before sunscreen. She also had an aversion to being called Cowbells. Her maiden name was Coble, K-O-B-E-L, but often at school she was called Cowbell, which she hated. And she wrote in the yearbook that she was just, as was asked to define a characteristic of her, she was just a born chatterbox. And it's interesting because there were many comments about how she liked to chat. She was often very open about talking with people and friendly, and I think she really was a chatterbox. And she became a legal secretary after she graduated. She wanted to go to New York. She wanted to really experience the high life and the excitement of living in New York City, and she did that. She lived there for a few years with with her sister, my mom's mother's sister. But I think that grew old, and she ultimately came back to Atlantic City and worked also in a legal office. And again, I think like being back and like being at the beach. And she was a big Frank Sinatra fan. She often, would talk to me about that and how she stood in line for hours at the Paramount Theater waiting to see him. So she often reflected on those experiences. After she met my dad, and he was living in Philadelphia, and somehow through a family relationship, I think his brother's wife, they made the relationship, and they ultimately married. My dad was a navigator, a squadron commander in the Air Force for 20 years, actually 26 years. Her life changed after that because between the Air Force and then other jobs that my dad had, it required them and ultimately Lisa and me to move. And that was challenging because I was born in Tampa. We moved to Savannah, lived in Macon, Georgia, Plattsburgh, New York, which is way at the top of New York State near Montreal. Then we lived in Dallas, Texas, Margate, and ultimately in Cherry Hill. So it was a lot of moving. And I think that as I've thought a lot about this, I think it helped my mom develop a strong sense of independence, which I think has rubbed off on me. It was hard as a kid moving a number of times, picking up and losing your friends and leaving experiences that you wanted to keep, but you kept going. And I think that it's definitely something that I reflect on a lot and realize that she did develop a sense of independence. She had to, with my dad being traveling and working all the time and flying. But she made the best of it. I think it worked out. It obviously worked out well. But I always had this feeling that, geez, Mom, you never really got to see the places that Dad went in Europe. And as part of the Air Force, he traveled extensively. So, she and I went to places like Israel and London and Paris and New York. And when I had conferences, I would ask her to go, and she would. And she loved to travel, and I really think she enjoyed that. And I was just, I'm grateful to be able to have done that. And I think it was, a great time for her. I wanted just to talk a little bit about, as I think about food and places we lived, a little bit about food. Some of you in this congregation right now are wonderful chefs, bakers, and more. And I'm not going to single anybody out, but I think you all know who I'm talking about. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So in Georgia, I have fond memories of a simple dish that my mom made, and I never would predict when she would do it, but it was a simple dish, and I always look forward to it. It involved ground beef, kind of thick noodles, and cream of mushroom soup. Now, that wasn't Julia Child's or any French cooking by any means, but it was so incredibly good. And I still think of it to this day, even though I haven't had it for years. And I can still picture the dining room where we had it in the house. I mean, it's incredibly meaningful to me. And then I often have these memories when we lived in Savannah. Mom and I, especially after my little, I think, softball practice, we would go to this little restaurant. It was really more like a little soda shop. It was really what it was. And they had these hamburgers that I thought they were fantastic. But I think if you looked at them today, you'd wonder what I was talking about. It was just kind of like this little coleslaw type thing on this very thin little hamburger and a roll, and I'd had a Coke with that, and we'd sit there, and it was the best time. It was absolutely fantastic. It's things like that. Or, the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and tuna fish sandwiches that my mom made me for lunch with Fritos. Those were favorites. Or the commish bread, which is very much like biscotti. She perfected a recipe, I think, of commish bread that involved chocolate chips. Initially, she always used walnuts with them, but when the chocolate chips went in as a trial and then she added some cinnamon, they were the best. It's things like that that really I remember greatly and won't ever forget. And then in later times, my mom, I think she should have had stock in McDonald's and the maker of Dr. Pepper, because she would drink liters, literally, of Dr. Pepper, Breyer's ice cream, and then I would make frequent trips to McDonald's, picking up hotcakes and then sometimes the occasional fish sandwich, which she also loved. So those are other things that I just recall significantly. She, in later times, became a volunteer in the local emergency room. She worked at an outpatient clinic for patients receiving chemotherapy. And she was perfect in those roles because she was this person that really connected with so many people and liked to talk and help people, especially that might have been down either emotionally or just down physically. She loved jewelry. She became very knowledgeable about that, and she worked at Kelmer's, which used to be in the local area here, not far from here. She knew a lot about golds and diamonds, and that whole language to me was like so foreign when she was talking about color and carats and all sorts of stuff that I just didn't understand. But she loved that, and she had some really good customers there that really felt quite a lot about her. She was calm. She had a calm nature. That went far in providing hope and relief to so many people. And then she started running, and I can't remember exactly when that was. I think it must have been around the 70s. I'm not quite sure, but she became, very friendly with Joan, who's here today, and they would run in the morning. I mean, I'm talking early, like 5:30-ish, I think. I mean, really incredibly early. But it was something she loved to do. And I think it was maybe something that really freed her, and she had some really good friends, especially Joan and others that she ran with, and I think that was fantastically helpful. And in her later days when she wasn't able to run and had difficulty even ambulating, she'd often ask about Cooper River, and she'd love to go there. So it was a great experience. I'm glad that she was able to do that. And she encouraged me. She's always been somebody that has encouraged me tremendously, whether it be in running, whether it be talking about illnesses, and just encouraging me to be the best person that I could be. And I can't forget that. She was somebody that would always ask me about work and the kind of patients that I was seeing and what was wrong with them in terms of their medical problems. And, I think she always felt so badly about some of the folks that I would talk about. I wouldn't say anything in great depth, but it was just general things. And I think she had, definite feelings about how hard that would be. And we often talked about medical students. Part of my job involves teaching a lot of medical students and always wanting to make sure they're good doctors. She always made a point of that, and I've not ever forgotten that. I always think of her when I'm interacting with them. But she, at the same time, was not overly fond of the medical profession. She had some experiences that were, I would say, less than ideal, but she wasn't one to sit back. And so she would reach out, she wrote some letters, made some phone calls, and she got responses about some of her experiences, and I think that she was able to make some definite changes. And over time, she then became enamored with MSNBC and Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell. They were favorites. MSNBC, I think, was on the channel most of the time, especially in the evenings. And she and I got a big laugh about drug commercials that were often there, and you've seen these things. If you take this drug, they have to list all the side effects. Your left leg might fall off, you might go blind, you might have this happen to you, and we would laugh because part of those commercials involved calling your doctor, telling your doctor if you have this, that, or the, you know what I'm talking about. We would laugh about that because she would often say, yeah, call your doctor, you're not going to get the doctor on the phone. And I think that's true. So we always had a good laugh about that. But in recent months, Mom struggled. She was, physically, unfortunately, not well, had some issues happen, and she never lost her sense of humor or her appetite. And I know, and I've told actually some of you here today, on many occasions, I know that she ate more than I did. I know that she did, and I'm gratified for that. I will miss her greatly. She was loyal, loving, always believed in doing the right thing. So I want to leave a message before I finish here today. Thank you for indulging me with my comments, too, by the way. I would like you to kind of follow in her footsteps. Be kind to somebody. And whether it be a kind word, a donation of food or money or your time, in these difficult times that we're having right now, we all need to work together. We need to work together to make the world a softer and more comforting place. And just to finish up, I want to just tell you about 2 dreams I had this week. The first dream was about a ceremony, and it was really a ceremony, and it was about my mom, and it was a ceremony, and a party was attached to it. And everybody at this party/ceremony were wearing white. They were wearing white, and they had gold lapels, gold sleeves. Everything was gold and white. And I remember that I wanted to I wanted to get up and say something on behalf of my mom. It was a celebration of her and her life. And I got up, and all of a sudden there was this tremendous amount of noise. And I couldn't hear myself think. And I tried to speak, and nobody was listening, couldn't hear me. The next thing I remember, Lisa got up, and she started to talk. And then things ended. But I think that dream may mean that, has been so much cacophony and so much noise among us all that, we need to sort of try to get through all that. And the second dream, I think, helped me get to that point, because it was a dream where I was driving in a vehicle with my mom, and we were going to New York City. And occasionally we'd go there. My dad would sometimes go too. I hadn't been there. She hadn't been there for a number of years. But I remember saying, Mom, hey, we can do this, we can do that. You can see a Broadway show. What do you think you want to do? And, she didn't say anything. I think she was thinking. But I know that she is taking that journey, and I'm so glad that she's in peace, and she's going to be in a better place, and a journey that's going to be good, and I have no doubt about that. So love you, Mom. Love all of you for being here today. Thank you so much. It's extraordinarily meaningful. I appreciate it so much. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. I'm fascinated by the colors you saw, the gold and white. Gold perhaps representing her avocation, working in the jewelry store, and gold and the preciousness of that. And white is also a color of purity, of perfection. So perhaps that's something to hold on to, what your dream meant. And ultimately, in response to your presentation, I would say, that was swell. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to please stand for the two concluding prayers. The first is going to be called the El Malei Rachamim. I'll read it in Hebrew and in English. And it will be using her Hebrew name, which I'm reminding you is Liba Bat Moshe. And it speaks about turning to God even at times of distress. El Malei Rachamim is God who is full of compassion. The concluding prayer, which typically is read at the interment, is called the Mourner's Kaddish. Curiously, it's not referring to the word mourning at all. It's a prayer of blessings, of our blessing God and all the wonderfulness of our lives. It's a prayer for survivors. It's a prayer for our wish for strength. Because the burial is going to be at some other future time in Arlington, Matt and I discussed, and we are going to say that Kaddish prayer to conclude our ceremony, at which point I'll ask you then to retain your seats, and then the staff will come in and work and remove the coffin. So please do stand now, those who are comfortable. El Malei Rachamim, שוכן במרומים, חמצי מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, ובמעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמת ליבה בת משה, שהלכה לעולמה. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה, אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה, אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה ונאמר, Amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Lorraine Burday, Liba Bat Moshe, Liba daughter of Moshe, who has gone to her eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the worthy and righteous deeds that she performed in the land of the living. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord is her portion. May she rest in the tranquility of shalom, of peace. And let us say, Amen. And now the Kaddish, which is in the booklets, those two of you in front. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. V'alma divra chirutei v'yamrich malchutei. V'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye lekol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uv'izman kari v'imaru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mavorach. Olam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yit'alal shemei l'kudesha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata de'amiran v'alma v'imaru. Amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru. Amen. Please be seated. I offer the traditional rabbinic blessing on your behalf. Hamakom yinachem etchem b'tok sha'ar ve'lei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May the merciful God have comfort for you all among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Amen. Adonai v'yagur b'olecha v'yishton b'har chodshecha oleh tamid b'tzedek v'dover emet b'avavo lo regal al lishono v'asa l've'edu ra'a v'cherpa lo masa al kolovo v'yivzeh be'inav v'yipatz v'yireh Adonai yirabenu yishpal ha'ra v'lo yavir Yasko lo natan v'neshem v'shochan al makilot Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our services here this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Please take care and be well. We'll probably do some if we can, like early afternoon. This way it gives us, since, it's a bit of a drive to get down there, it gives a little bit of time to get there. I was thinking, I think we were going to talk about, I actually sort of think about maybe going out. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, it's up to you. If you were going to do that and you wanted us to do a morning time, we could do that. But we'll call you once they call us, and then we'll get everything scheduled. Okay? Yeah, no. Is there anything else that I need to do? No, everything, the cemetery has all the documentation they need, they're gonna reach out to us. Just keep an eye out if they send you an email or anything, call us and just let us know, and then this way we can coordinate and get everything scheduled. We have all the pictures back here.